The Mayo Experience.
Mayo Experience. Mayo Experience. Mayo Experience. Experience.
Welcome to the Pat Mayo Experience, talking some Hall of Fame game and what we can glean from that from a fantasy perspective. Some training camp news, plus some injuries, rapid firing, really. Honestly, I'm not going to lie to you. I'm just scrolling down Roto World and see what's going on, and that way, hey, we get to update it with the news. I'm going to try out a series of these micro pods, so give me some feedback on these ones. Let me know if this is something you're actually interested in. If not, I'll scrap it right away, but it's just a way to keep on top of everything without a guest. I'm still going to have my guests on to really hash things out and get some debate going, but as a primer for maybe if you miss some sort of news, and it's a great chance for me to talk this through, and you can see where I'm shifting my rankings. I updated them on August 2nd, right after the Doug Baldwin injury. Didn't have much effect on the overall rankings, and I'll get more into the extended Baldwin news from what I talked about with Seeley on Wednesday, but you can go back and check that out. Monday morning or Sunday night, at midnight, I have a full show dropping with Warren Sharp, talking about strength of schedule and an intro to NFL betting for the season. If you're a beginner, I mean, a lot of this stuff seasoned bettors know, but if you're looking to get into the betting market for the NFL season, there's some tips and tricks in there, stuff to avoid, stuff to target, and bad bets that a lot of people make that you're really going to want to stay away from. Please give the episode a like. That does go a long way to help keeping the show free, as does an iTunes review, an Audio Boom review, Stitcher, Spotify, iHeartRadio, TuneIn. Really does go a long way. But first, I want to start off with the Hall of Fame game from last night. And if you think that I'm the type of person that sat down on a Thursday night and watched an entire football preseason game, you are misinformed. At least, what kind of quality of life do you think I have that I just have nothing to do rather than sit down and watch an awful football game? So the move is to record it and then wake up the next morning and just run through it. You can watch the entire game in 15 minutes. I think that NFL Rewind has that feature as well. I didn't look into it for my season pass last year, but I mean, that's how I watch a lot of games that I don't get a chance to fully watch, especially on Sundays, and how I do the majority of my preseason watching, because these games are brutal. No one played it. Actually, Lamar Jackson played in it, but all fantasy relevant players were far away from this game. One note on it, though, actually two notes. One, from a betting perspective, the final score was 17-16. That is the 11th time in the past 14 Hall of Fame games that the under has hit. Under 40 points exactly has been underneath those games in 11 of them. So just keep that in mind for next year. Offenses aren't necessarily clicking right away as we get out of the gate with the first game of the preseason. So you might want to hammer the under market if the books do not adjust to that. And I guess Javon Wims saw 10 targets for the Bears, so DK players, when you're looking into the second preseason game or even fourth preseason game, if you're playing any Bears receivers, Wims looks like a guy who could, I don't want to see as D.D. Westbrook or Kenny Golladay preseason potential, but at least he's someone that it looks like the Bears want to get an extended look at when all the scrubs are on the field. But if you're playing DK preseason slates, the move really is to either post head-to-heads or get into these tournaments. There were so many people that I saw, and I actually stayed away from it, so I just kind of went and looked and see what people were up to, especially on the showdown slate, that people were playing Trubisky at over a 4% rate. Trey Burton was a guy that wasn't highly owned, but highly owned enough that there were just so many dead lineups out there that the preseason really is a good time. I don't really cover the preseason all that well, but I had TJ Hernandez on a little while ago, and he is an excellent source for really mining the best values in some of these preseason games. But I think it's one of the market for betting and DK in terms of NFL is very efficient and has gotten progressively better. Just the quality of player, the floor has really risen on them. Even your average players really know what they're doing now. But in the preseason market, it seems like no one has a fucking clue. So it's a very exploitable market and probably the only one that you'll really get in the NFL season outside of week 17 when people are barely paying attention and a lot of new names come in that a lot of people don't know. So I think that's something you might want to look into as we go along. But so let's get some news and notes. Actually, you know what? Lamar Jackson. So he finished with 4 of 10 passing for 33 yards. It's not bad. He threw a touchdown, threw a pick, did not look great whatsoever. However, the big thing was 8 rushes for 25 yards on the ground. So if Lamar Jackson ever gets into play, and we saw this at times, it's the reason why people played Johnny Manziel in a live final 2 or 3 years ago now, I guess. 2 years ago, 3 years ago, whenever it was. But even Deshaun Kaiser and his relevant fantasy performances at low DK prices last year, his ability to run, and especially not being as seasoned as you would want him to be, or I mean, he's about as seasoned as a rookie can be, and this was his first start, so you would expect him to get better. But if he ever does come in or gets an extended look in the preseason, he's not really going through his progressions as of yet. He's just taking off and running, which probably from a real life perspective, not the greatest thing in the world, but from a DraftKings perspective and a fantasy perspective, top shelf stuff. This is exactly what we want to see if you're going to use Lamar Jackson. So if he starts getting some more run over Robert Griffin, if Flacco's just going to be on the sidelines, Lamar Jackson actually is an upside performer you can use throughout the extended universe of the preseason on DraftKings. And if he ever does end up with the start in the regular season over Joe Flacco, or if Flacco goes down, something you can look forward to. A good floor player and one that will possess some upside. Moving down, some injury news. We talked about Doug Baldwin on Wednesday's show. I'm still not too concerned yet, but it does look like he may miss the entirety of the preseason with this knee problem. I think if it was truly all that serious, then we'd be looking at a situation where he would go get surgery right away. If this injury happened throughout the season, it looks like it's a sprained MCL, then you're looking at, he'd miss 2 to 3 weeks. And if that's the case, then, that's not great. But right now, he's going to get a full month to rest. Plus, they might just be shelving him because Russell Wilson is working with an entire new set of receivers. We know what Tyler Lockett can do in this offense, and he's going to be a better DraftKings player than a season-long player just due to upside, but he's never going to have that consistency. So Jaron Brown is someone that I am really looking at to see how he meshes with Russell Wilson, at least reports through training camp or even in preseason games. And Brandon Marshall, he was dealing with a toe, an ankle, and a hamstring injury, has been cleared to participate in team drills. I don't know how much of an impact Brandon Marshall is going to make. Right now, my favorite after Baldwin would be Jaron Brown, but the best thing that this can do for all of Doug Baldwin's stock is that people are going to panic. He was going in the early to mid third round. I was super high on him. There was a lot of other people high on him as well that, if you really wanted to get him, you may have to take him at the end of the second round. I don't think that's on the board anymore. You might, if you pick towards the back end of the third, be able to get him there. He may sneak into the fourth, depending on how risk-adverse players are. I'm still good taking him at the beginning of the third round and rolling the dice based on the projected volume that I see him at. And listen, I'm wrong all the time. I like to roll the dice, but I see this as a situation where Doug Baldwin, if he plays all 16 games with the poor defense on Seattle, with Russell Wilson presumably throwing the ball a lot of the time, and all of the red zone opportunity that has opened up with the departure of Jimmy Graham and Paul Richardson, that Doug Baldwin could be a highly impactful fantasy receiver this year, a top 10 receiver in my mind. It's all going to do with that health, and if we don't know, you're going to have to take that risk, or you're going to have to avoid it completely. I'm still good with it. I would still take him. If you can get the third pick overall in the draft, that's the perfect time to take him in the third round. You can get a potential top 10 receiver at a third round value, and boom, that's how you win fantasy championships. You don't win fantasy championships by being a coward. So taking Doug Baldwin or potentially even Jaron Brown late, if you want to pass on some of that Doug Baldwin risk, may be the way to go. Antonio Brown left Steelers practice with an undisclosed injury. Apparently it's a strained quad. We don't really know. He'll be fine in a few days. You're going to see this all throughout the preseason. These elite guys that don't need to get in the reps, any sort of tweak, just put them on the sidelines. They don't want to be out there anyway. You can always run the potential of having a non-contact injury. Don't worry about Antonio Brown. He's going to be fine. He's still the number 1 receiver on the board and my number 4 overall pick behind the top 3 running backs of Todd Gurley at 1, Le'Veon Bell at number 2, and David Johnson at 3. Although, starting to tinker with the idea of moving David Johnson up 1 spot over Le'Veon Bell for reasons that I'll get into on a future podcast, but I just think that the volume and touchdown upside could really be there, and just a lot of people seem to be underrating David Johnson. A lot of people say that Zeke is going to, he's a much better pick than David Johnson. I just don't see that in PPR formats. In fact, on Monday's show with Warren Sharp, we really dig into the Ezekiel Elliott situation and why he's not used in the passing game, and sort of a spoiler on the conclusion that we came to is that the coaching staff is just bad. They don't know what they're doing, and it's one of these things where if the coaching staff gets into a pattern of doing the same thing over and over and over again, it's very unlikely that they're going to change as long as they're with the new team. So between Jason Garrett and Scott Linehan, I just wouldn't see much changing. You're not going to have Ezekiel Elliott starting to average 6 targets per game out of the blue over the under 4 he was seeing last year. It's not going to be like a Todd Gurley-esque jump in the receiving department, which is what he would need to compete with a lot of these top 3 running backs in terms of overall volume, overall snap share, and touches to really contend to be the number 1 overall running back in terms of PPR scoring. So that's just something we dig into it a little bit more on that one. You can check it out Also, I appeared on the Fantasy Pros podcast. I don't know if it's up as of yet, but it should be dropping either over the weekend or early next week. Mike Taglieri is on there, Bobby Sylvester. It was a great time. We had some hot takes all around. We talked about risky players. So if you want to go check that out, it's a great podcast. A lot of great guests go on. Much better than myself. And I even claimed on that one, listen, you got to be wrong a lot of the time. And I think that's something that's very important when thinking about fantasy football strategy in a head-to-head league. Like I even said on that show, and I think I've said multiple times on this platform as well, that these best ball leagues, you hear a lot of experts talk about best ball leagues, and I own so many shares of this guy and so many shares of this guy. That's not super helpful for anyone doing like a real head-to-head like 12-team fantasy draft that they're playing in. Like, yeah, I'm playing in 2 fantasy leagues. I can't have 23% shares in this player versus this player. You got to make a stand somewhere. If you're not willing to be wrong, like I said earlier, not taking risk is really for cowards. Cowards don't win fantasy football championships. Realistically, there's no real difference between coming last and coming third. You need to roll the dice to the extent that you're willing to in order to capitalize on some of these situations. Risky players are where it's at. Just taking guys around their ADP, yeah, it can make sense in certain situations if you want to play it safe at some of your roster spots. You're going to have to roll the dice somewhere. So Doug Baldwin for me is going to be one of those guys that I'm not going to be overly concerned about this injury news unless something comes out and be like, hey, Doug Baldwin needs surgery, and now we're playing with a different ball game. Same as the Antonio Brown news. But from what we're listening to right now, reports seem fine. Next up, Denver. Teammates have acknowledged that second-round wide receiver Courtland Sutton, who I continuously get confused with Michael Gallup, who is in Dallas, and we'll get to a little bit later on, has already established himself as the Broncos' number 3 wideout. Now, if nothing changes in the Broncos system, I still like DT and Emmanuel Sanders. Emmanuel Sanders not more than DT, but a better value as DT, and still claiming their gigantic market share. Like we saw this for years with the Murray Cooper, Michael Crabtree in Oakland, that they were teammates that were actually above 25% market share. Denver is going to be a very similar situation. So just because you hear hype on Sutton, I don't like Sutton really as a pick in a redraft league. However, Sanders and Demaryius Thomas can still have 28 and 27% of the Case Keenum market share, which would be entirely more valuable than a Brock Osweiler, Paxton Lynch, or Trevor Siemian. Big Trevi. Bad situation in Denver last year. It's going to be so highly elevated. They're going to come back. They're going to be healthy. I like both of them as picks, but Emmanuel Sanders really sticks out as a great value now going in like the 7th, 8th round. That's a potential upside play that you can take advantage of. And, I mean, maybe Sutton can work his way into like a 15% market share and be a cheap price player on DraftKings out of the gate that you could potentially exploit. We'll need to see more in the preseason as that goes along. In New England, Eric Decker has signed a contract to be on the team. They're also working out Kobe Hamilton, last seen, I think, on the Steelers, just running deep routes. I think that was the last we saw of him, at least the last I remember him anyway. He's going to have a workout with the Patriots today. We'll see if he signs or not, but they just keep rolling through. We're getting news that Philip Dorsett is emerging in preseason. I don't really buy that. The only Patriots I'm really interested in, obviously Gronk, obviously Chris Hogan, and I still do really like Rex Burkhead to fill in as a slot role while Edelman is out, and even continue that role a little bit, even after Edelman is back, but to garner somewhere around like 15 to 18 touches per game, probably like 8 to 10 out of the backfield, probably another 4 to 7 depending on the game flow in the receiving game, and I think that's going to make him more valuable than Sony Michel. I get into this with tags on that Fantasy Pros podcast, and here's another one. Nesson's Doug Key pegs Jeremy Hill as the favorite over Mike Gillislee for the Patriots' final running back spot. I don't see that affecting Burkhead whatsoever, but that could hurt the potential bottom line of touchdowns in terms of Sony Michel. And a lot has been made about how, oh, you know what, the Patriots use first-round draft capital on Sony Michel. The same sort of stuff has come out about Penny in Seattle. And you got to remember, if you take these guys in the first round, you get them for 5 years, basically the shelf life of a running back. The Patriots know what shelf lives are for running backs. That doesn't mean they're going to be thrust into the role year one, but it does mean they get them that extra year at a cheaper price rather than having to go through what Le'Veon Bell is going for right now. This is not the same situation as taking Barkley second overall. It's no guarantee that just because these guys were taken in the first round that they're going to immediately be the featured back. I don't see it playing out that way. I still think that Rex Burkhead in PPR formats is more valuable than Sony Michel will be, especially on a week-to-week basis. And next up, San Francisco. Let's go to the 49ers. We talked a little bit of this with Jake, how everyone looks great in training camp, especially out of the backfield. I do like Breda as a late round pick over spending an early round pick on Jerick McKinnon. It's just a value play at that point. I think there's enough pieces in that same range. Someone like the Devonta Freeman I like more than Jerick McKinnon is going a little bit later. I'd still rather just put my eggs in that basket, gamble with almost no risk on Breda in the 13th, 14th round, and hopefully he can work himself into a share or maybe be the between the tackles runner. I'm still not convinced that Jerick McKinnon, while having potential, substantial upside, don't get me wrong, I think there's a lot of risk coming with him as being a featured back in this offense. So that's just something to look forward to in drafts if you're planning it that way. The San Jose Mercury News reports that Jimmy Garoppolo to Marquise Goodwin connection grows, quote, stronger by the day. This is something I may have to reevaluate in my rankings. A lot of what we saw from Goodwin last year is with Kittle injured towards the end of the season, no Pierre Garçon, and him just getting comfortable, Jimmy that is being in the new offense. Obviously the success was there in terms of wins and losses, but can he really prop up fantasy receivers if more of them are out there and all the options are healthy? But I may have to go Goodwin over Garçon the more this plays out, if this truly is a thing. So that's something to keep on your radar. Right now, if you're drafting like in the next 7 days or so, or even over the weekend, I don't know why you would be doing that, but Goodwin is still going extremely late and something to look forward to if you're trying to peg some late round upside receivers. He and Kenny Stills are still going around the same range, which is probably too low, to be perfectly honest with you. Who is up next? Oh, Indianapolis. A ton out of Indianapolis. It looks like Frank Reich expects Andrew Luck to play about a quarter in Thursday's preseason opener against the Seahawks. You're still getting T.Y. Hilton at a discounted rate right now. I've moved up both Luck and T.Y. Hilton, expecting Luck to presumably be healthy at this point. And T.Y. Hilton has bumped up from tier 3 to tier 2 towards the back end, one spot behind Doug Baldwin. The more and more I think about it, there could be a case to move T.Y. Hilton up even more, but that inconsistency that we saw with Jacoby Brissett last season will probably be gone for T.Y. Hilton. Once you thrust Andrew Luck back into that role, then T.Y. Hilton becomes an impact fantasy receiver. Still right now, Tyreek Hill is someone being drafted over T.Y. Hilton. I personally think that's ludicrous. When we talk about the potential upside and market share that T.Y. Hilton can expect in this offense, Jake and I talked about Deion Kane on Wednesday's show as well. If he can win out that number 2 job, there could be some fantasy potential for him as well as a very, very late round sleeper. In the backfield, it's all glowing news for everyone except for Marlon Mack at this point. We got Jordan Wilkins has been excelling in Colts camp since the, quote, pads went on. I still like Jordan Wilkins as almost like Brady, one of these guys at the back end that you can draft and hopefully it works out in their favor. If not, you just cut them and move on your way, or give it 3 weeks to see what happens, see if he can run away with the role. And that's a great way to play your running back situation instead of like taking handcuffs or a backup quarterback or a backup tight end, something stupid like that. I'd rather take these running backs who have a chance to see their role expand as the season goes along or potentially win a training camp battle. Right now, Nyheim Hines continues to be used out of the slot in training camp. He's well known as being the best receiving option in the Colts backfield, so maybe he can adapt some sort of like Rex Burkhead role or Duke Johnson role or Theo Riddick role with the Colts. I want to see how that plays out during the preseason, and if he is on the field with Luck during that preseason game, I think that will be very telling once we start looking at it, because the reports do say the Colts touch leader in the backfield every week could vary game to game, which is bad news for Marlon Mack. I'll probably have to bump him down my rankings. It's not that he's going to be a non-factor or he can't win this job. It just looks like Wilkins and Hines are getting a lot more buzz than Marlon Mack at the moment. In Oakland, word came out that Jordy Nelson looks like he's 28 again. I mean, the guy's only 32. That's not that far removed. The best thing you can say about a guy is that he looks like he's 28 years old. He's probably washed up. I have no faith in really anyone outside of Cooper and Marshawn Lynch in this Raiders offense. And maybe I'm completely wrong about this. This is another thing that Sharp and I really dig into on Monday's show, just the Gruden effect on both the win total, the offense and defense, and what you can expect from the Oakland Raiders. I would expect a very high volume for Amari Cooper and Marshawn Lynch, just because I think that guys like Jordy Nelson and Doug Martin don't have a whole lot left to offer in the NFL at this point. Next up, we got the Lions. And Kerryon Johnson has shown well in pass protection throughout training camp. If he's literally someone that can be on the field for all 3 downs, I don't think that's something we're going to see because that's just never really been a part of what the Lions get up to. It could spell bad news for Theo Riddick, who I always just kind of like every single year. He seems to be the safest, although I still think that you're going to see Kerryon Johnson not have the goal line working again. This is something that needs to play itself out, but why have LeGarrette Blount on the roster if you're not going to use him near the goal line? Whether you think that he's good or bad around there, the narrative around LeGarrette Blount is that is what he does. You don't pass him the ball, you give him the ball when you're inside 10 yards, he's going to mash it home. And that's something the Lions have really struggled with is red zone efficiency in terms of the ground game over the course, since I can remember watching the Lions play football. Basically, since Barry Sanders, they've had a problem in that area, and that's why you bring in someone like LeGarrette Blount. But it seems like if Kerryon Johnson can stay on the field during the 2-minute drills or even play some 3rd downs while working in between the 20s, that would give him a bump up in terms of overall volume and fantasy value as it goes along. Out of Houston, 4th-round pick Keke Coutee, one of the best names in all of fantasy this year. I was hoping he could make an impact battling it out and winning that slot role over Braxton Miller. He's going to be sidelined a few weeks with a strained hamstring, so that might put him behind the 8 ball. Probably undraftable at this point. Even if he starts the season healthy, he's probably not going to win out any jobs in the final week of training camp or preseason. So it might be like week 4, week 5, week 6 before we actually see him start to get some real run and potentially be able to usurp Braxton Miller and get on the field. Now, if there's other injuries, that could really change the timetable of that. But for a rookie, especially a 4th-round rookie with a really hilarious name, and that's why most people know him, that you need to win in training camp to win that job, and he's just not going to have enough reps to go through. So you could probably cross him off the list, add him to the watch list for when the season goes along, but right now, probably undraftable. The Jets, 2 news items out of the Jets. We have Quincy Enunwa will be sidelined a week or 2 with a thumb injury. Not great news. I mean, the thumb is whatever, but just a guy who missed the entire season with a bad neck injury last year, not getting those reps to really get on the same page with whoever it is who starts for the Jets, whether it be McCown, whether it be Teddy B. It's probably not going to be Darnold, but even just getting familiar with all 3 of those guys could be a big benefit. I think he's a risky pick, but the ADP isn't so high right now that Robbie Anderson still is kind of the man on the scene with the Jets, because the other report is that Isaiah Crowell is expected to be, quote, a big factor in the Jets offense. Not buying that for a second. I just don't think the Jets offense is going to be ahead enough that they're going to be that they're going to be running the ball on the ground, and maybe they'll use Crowell out of the backfield as a receiving back, although nothing in his career would dictate that. And with McGuire already out, Bilal Powell could be in line for some early season work and just greasy PPR games. If you play in a deep PPR league and you need a flex play, Bilal Powell is someone that could sneak in there, get like 4 to 5 catches per game. Not really do much for you, but enough that you're not taking a 0 in that spot. And he's someone that's going basically undrafted right now. I would not be reaching for Crowell and thinking of him as a running back 2 or even a flex play starting week 1. I just don't see that happening. Maybe I'm wrong, but he's just not an intriguing player for me. There's very little upside to be had unless you're really buying this Jets offense. I'd rather take a shot on the receiving game, and it does look like, especially with Enunwa out, we don't know what's going on with Pryor, that Robbie Anderson still stands to benefit the most, especially when you look at him from an air yards perspective, that he's going to be quite good. So that's what's going on with the Jets. And finally, out of Dallas, Terrence Williams has settled his legal issues based on his outstanding warrant or standing arrest from May. He was charged with public intoxication. No word yet if the NFL is going to crack down on him, but he's just another wrench into this Dallas receiving game where I do think that there is going to be value to be mined. Right now, in my mind power rankings, it would go Allen Hurns, I was going to say Cortland Sutton, but it's not. It's Michael Gallup, Cole Beasley, then Terrence Williams. But the preseason is going to dictate a lot of this. When you watch the first team with Dallas, there's a gigantic target share to go around for someone in that offense. Whether the skill is there or not, who knows? But it looks like Dallas is going to have to pass quite often this season, and we kind of already know they're not passing to Zeke. So it has to be somebody. And when you take Dez out of the equation, take Witten out of the equation, that's a lot of open targets for someone to inherit. I do think that Allen Hurns is the leader in the clubhouse, but the familiarity of Dak Prescott and Terrence Williams could go a long way with getting him on the field early. So seeing how he gets back into camp, having all this settled, and if he's not suspended, he could be starting week 1 and be a pretty good value. Anyway, that'll do it on the Pat Mayo Experience. You can find the entire Pat Mayo Experience draft kit on my Facebook page at facebook.com/thepme. All free, all on demand, whenever you want it. I expect to update the rankings on Sunday night. I might wait till after the first week of the preseason games unless something really dramatic changes, so probably in a week's time. So I'm confident with the rankings that I have up there now. Well, as confident as I can be, or you can be in my rankings, but they're a nice juxtaposition to something like Fantasy Pros to see where I'm at versus the consensus, just if you want to weigh people and see where people are going versus an ADP, that you want to take as many sources as possible. It's hard just to trust one person, but there's certain players that I do have a stance on. If you've been watching the show regularly, you probably know who those guys are right now. Plus, I have a full load of PGA Championship coverage. If you're into the golf, DraftKings Millionaire Maker going on this week. I already have 2 shows out, the early betting preview, early Millie Maker picks. I'll be back on Monday and Tuesday with full shows on that again, plus a live chat on Wednesday with Reed Fowler, 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time on the DraftKings YouTube channel, plus all of my article dropping over the weekend. Like I mentioned, I'm on that Fantasy Pros podcast. I did a week 1 pricing review with Gary and Thorne on his podcast. If you want to go check that out, you can follow him on Twitter at Gary and Thorne. And then towards the end of next week, I'm going to be in New York City with Gary and talking about the Fantasy Baseball DraftKings World Championships. We'll be doing some showdown DraftKings PGA Championship shows, doing some mock draft reviews. It's going to be a whole lot of fun. I'll be live on the scene, and you can check it out on demand after the fact as well in New York City, in Midtown, my old stomping grounds. So that's going to be a whole lot of fun, so be on the lookout for that. Anyway, again, let me know if these are sorts of shows that you like from an informational standpoint. I'm just going to kind of run through the daily guests. It's not going to be an everyday thing, but every 3 days, maybe on Fridays, to get you ready for the weekend, or even to recap some of the news and notes that happens after the first slate of preseason games and every subsequent week after that. Anyway, thank you for watching. I'm Pat Mayo. Give the episode a like. I'll see you next time.
Pat Mayo Experience! Experience!